The wind blew low and hard across Dagger Ridge, sweeping dust and ash through the narrow canyons like whispers of something long dead. No birds called, no hooves stirred. The only sound was the faint creak of a weather-warped sign swaying outside a rotted post. Sundown, Pop 37. The number hadn't been true in years. Eloise Carter stood at the edge of the ridge, her wide-brimmed, hat-shadowing eyes the color of dark whiskey. She didn't blink when the wind tugged at the edge of her coat. Below, the burned husk of what used to be her brother's barn smoldered under the sun, embers curling like fingers too stubborn to let go. The smoke rose slow and thin, like a prayer too late. She didn't cry. Not anymore. Behind her, the faint shuffle of boots in gravel made her spin halfway, one hand already on the butt of the Colt slung low at her hip. "Ma'am," came the quiet voice. He wasn't tall, not exactly, but he stood like someone who didn't much care for the difference. His coat was dusted in trail mud, stitched along one sleeve with a thread too bright to be accidental. His left hand bore the marks of an old rope burn, still raw-looking, and the rifle slung across his back had seen better days. But it was his eyes that stopped her, one blue, one green. Unsettling, not cruel, but watching. "You're on Carter land," she said. "I figured," he answered. "Place smells like grief. You got a name. Wes Alton. Don't sound local. Don't sound like I'm trying to be." Silence stretched. The wind picked up again, blowing soot into their boots. Far off, a hawk cried out once, then fell quiet. Eloise stepped aside just enough to make her stance neutral, not inviting, not threatening. "You looking for someone, Alton?" He paused. "Used to be. Not anymore. Looking for something else now." "What's that?" "Rest," he said. "Or something that passes for it." She studied him for a long beat, then turned back to the burning barn. "We got little of either out here. I noticed." A log shifted in the embers with a sharp crack, sending sparks upward. Eloise didn't flinch. Her jaw tightened. "My brother died last night." Wes looked at the smoke. "The kind of death that leaves tracks." "No tracks," she said. "No noise. No mercy." He said nothing. That kind of death didn't need questions. She finally turned back to him. "We'll talk inside. Storm's coming." He nodded once and followed her down the trail. By nightfall, thunder had begun to curl over the distant plains, a low growl without rain. Inside the Carter homestead, all creaking floorboards and sagging beams, Wes sat across from Eloise at a wooden table scarred with use. Between them, a single lantern guttered against the wind, rattling the shutters. "You always let strangers in?" he asked. "Only ones who don't lie first." "You think I ain't lying?" "I think you've got something you're hiding." "That's different." Wes allowed a smile or something like it. "Fair." Outside, the storm finally broke, not with violence, but with steady, soaking rain. The kind that washed away blood if you gave it enough time. Eloise stared at the window. "There's something coming." "I figured." She turned back to him. "Something bad." Wes rested both hands on the table. "I've met bad before." She nodded. "Then maybe you'll stay a while." And somewhere far beyond the ridge, hooves began to stir the wet ground. Slow, steady, coming closer. Morning came muted and gray, the kind of dawn that made a man feel like the sun had second thoughts. Rain had stopped, but the ground still wept. Water pooled in wagon ruts, and the air hung heavy with the scent of wet earth and charred timber. Wes stood on the porch, his fingers wrapped around a dented tin mug of coffee, so black it threatened to bite back. He stared out across the hollow, where Carter land rolled down into the ash-blown field. Nothing moved, but still he watched. Inside, Eloise sat cross-legged near the hearth, oiling the chambers of her father's old Spencer rifle. Her hands were quick and certain, knuckles rough from years of grit and harvest. She didn't speak, not yet. Not until she'd counted the rounds twice and loaded 6. Finally, she said, "You ever heard of a man called Roy Keep?" Wes turned just slightly, enough to let the name settle. "Sounds familiar. Gang name or bounty?" "Both." Eloise clicked the chamber shut. "He's the reason I buried 2 brothers. And now he's the reason I keep a loaded rifle under my pillow." "Funny," Wes said, sipping his coffee. "I always found revenge runs colder than justice." Eloise's gaze cut to him, and yet both bleed red. He gave a slow nod. "True enough." She rose and stepped to the window, brushing aside the ragged curtain. "Keeper's not a man who rides alone. He's got men, half-breeds and worse. Last winter they raided a church in Dustwell. Hung the preacher on his own bell rope." Wes looked at her. "And you think they're coming here?" "I don't think. I know." He waited. "My brother Caleb, he made a deal. One I didn't know about. One that cost him his life." Her voice cracked at the edge, but she didn't let it fall. "They'll come for what he promised." Wes set his cup down, the sound hollow on the wood. "What was the deal?" She hesitated. "I'm still figuring that out." That was answer enough. Outside, the wind picked up again, but this time it carried something different, scattered hoofbeats echoing off the ridge, distant but deliberate. Wes stepped off the porch, boots sinking slightly into the wet soil. How many riders you expectin'? At least 5, maybe more. Keever never travels light. Wes checked the chamber of his revolver. Then, I reckon we best start preparing. Together, they set about turning the Carter homestead into something close to a fort. The barn was lost, but the root cellar was deep and narrow, good for hiding. The windows were shuttered, nailed tight. They rolled barrels in front of the doors and laid out ammunition on the table, like a gambler stacking his final bet. Eloise paused once, hands trembling slightly as she lit the lanterns. You don't even know me, Alton. Why stay? He holstered his Colt and looked at her steady. 'Cause something tells me this ain't just your fight. The words hung between them, and then, just before dusk, the riders came into view. 6 silhouettes appeared on the ridge, painted against the sky like shadows with purpose. No flags, no sounds, just motion and menace. One figure led the others, his coat flapping behind him like a vulture's wings. A wide-brimmed hat, tall in the saddle, rifle resting across the pommel. Eloise stepped out onto the porch beside Wes. That's him, she said, voice flat. Roy Keever. Wes didn't reply. He just loosened his revolver and waited. And as the first of the horses descended the ridge, Eloise whispered, let's see what the devil wants. The riders reached the lower field just as twilight laid a bruise-colored shadow across the land. Their horses kicked up mud and ash with every step, hooves sinking into the soft earth like they belonged there, like they'd claimed it already. Eloise gripped her rifle tight, finger resting along the trigger guard, but ready. Wes stood silent beside her, one hand resting on the post, the other hanging near his holster. They weren't outnumbered, not yet, but they would be soon if Keever chose to whistle for more. Roy Keever dismounted with a slow, deliberate grace. He was younger than Eloise remembered, maybe because he'd stolen more years than he'd earned. He wore a buffalo duster stained with blood and trail dust, and around his neck hung a silver coin on a black cord. That coin had once belonged to Eloise's brother, Caleb. Well, Keever said, spreading his arms like a showman. Didn't expect such a warm welcome. No one's welcoming you, Eloise answered. Could have fooled me. You brought your watchdog. He nodded toward Wes. Wes didn't blink. I bite. Keever grinned, flashing a set of teeth too white for a man with such dirty boots. I bet you do. Behind him, his men fanned out lazily, pretending not to be a threat, but each had a rifle, a knife, or both within easy reach. One of them, a wiry man with a snake tattoo curling up his throat, stared too long at Eloise. Wes noticed. I ain't in the mood for speeches, Eloise said. Say your piece. Keever tapped the silver coin against his chest. Caleb made a deal, $500 in silver. Said he'd move a wagon through the pass for us. Said he'd look the other way. And he died before keeping his word. Now that's inconvenient, especially since the wagon's gone missing. Eloise's jaw tightened. I don't know anything about a wagon. Maybe not. Keever's smile never reached his eyes. But you do know about family loyalty and debts. This land owes you nothing. That ain't what the men I paid are saying. They claim the Carter girl intercepted it, took the shipment, hid it. Wes finally spoke. And you believe hired liars. I believe money has a way of making men truthful or dead. Keever tilted his head. So here's the deal, Miss Carter. You got till sundown tomorrow to return what's mine. I don't have anything of yours. Keever ignored that. If it's not here by then, we burn the rest of the place. And we start over with your bones. Silence fell like a hammer. Wes stepped forward half a pace. Keever's men shifted. Eloise didn't move. Clock's ticking, Keever said, backing toward his horse. And I don't much like repeating myself. He mounted in one smooth motion. The others followed. No threats, no shots, not yet. Just promise in the dust. As they turned to leave, Keever tipped his hat. See you at sundown. They disappeared over the ridge the way they'd come, like ghosts that hadn't finished haunting. Eloise exhaled shakily. What if they're right? She whispered. What if Caleb did hide something here and I just don't know it? Wes stared into the dark. Then we've got a day to find it, or figure out how to hold this place when they come back. She looked at him. Would you fight? I've fought for less, he said, and bled for people who never thanked me. She didn't smile, but her eyes held something steady. Then I hope you're as good as you look. Wes turned back toward the cabin, boots heavy with mud and foreboding. Let's find that wagon. Night crawled in heavy and restless, bringing with it a wind that whispered through the cracked shutters like a warning. Inside the Carter homestead, the lantern cast flickering shadows that stretched and shivered across the floorboards. Wes sat at the edge of the table, rolling a cartridge between his fingers, eyes locked on nothing and everything. Eloise was pacing. Not nervously, but like someone trying to remember something buried too deep for memory to grab hold of. If Caleb hid that shipment, she muttered, he didn't do it in plain sight. Wes looked around. You have any hiding spots? Secret stashes? Not that I know of, but he was always fiddling with the floor under his bed. Said it creaked funny. Wes stood. Show me. They moved to the small room at the back of the cabin, Caleb's old quarters. Dust hung thick in the air, and the bed hadn't been touched since the funeral. Eloise stepped aside as Wes knelt and ran his hand along the warped pine boards. There, she pointed, right where his boots always hit. Wes pressed down. The board groaned slightly. He drew his knife and worked it under the seam. With a sharp tug, the plank lifted. Beneath it, a hollow space, dark, lined with rough cloth. He reached in and pulled free a small bundle wrapped in wax leather. Eloise stepped closer. What is it? Wes unwrapped it slowly. Inside lay a stack of paper notes, some U.S. currency, others foreign. More importantly, there was a silver coin, just like the one Keever wore, and a folded map with rough markings. A trail, a creek, a red X. Well, Wes said softly, looks like Caleb had his hands in something deep. Eloise took the map, eyes scanning it with practiced speed. That's Raven's Gully, 5 miles east. If he hid the wagon, it's there. We should leave now, Wes said, already replacing the board. Get there before Keever decides to. But Eloise didn't move. And what if there's nothing? What if it's just another empty lead? Then we still get answers. She looked at the map again. We ride at first light. Wes nodded. That night, sleep came slow and restless. Eloise sat by the window, shotgun across her lap, listening to the wind scratch at the glass like fingernails. She thought about her brother, how quiet he'd become in the months before his death, how he'd taken to riding at odd hours, never saying where. She remembered the bruises on his knuckles, the times he avoided eye contact. He was hiding something, not just silver guilt. When morning finally broke, it came with a pale, sickly sun that offered no warmth. They saddled the horses, hers a dapple-gray mare named Rosie, his a tall bay gelding with one bad ear and an ugly temperament. Neither animal was eager, and neither rider spoke much on the trail. Raven's Gully was a scar in the landscape, deep, narrow, and lined with jagged stone. By mid-morning they reached the creek that wound through its center. The trees leaned in close here like eavesdropping. According to the map, Wes said, the X is just past that bend. They dismounted, tying the horses in the shade. Moving quiet, they made their way through the brush, boots silent on moss and dead leaves. Then they saw it. A wagon, sunken halfway into the mud, draped with branches and tarps. It had been there for weeks at least, camouflaged and forgotten. Eloise rushed forward and pulled the covering away. Inside were crates, iron-sealed and branded with a black stamp. Military, Wes muttered. Confederate surplus, maybe, or stolen Union goods. Eloise's mouth went dry. He was running guns. And Keever wanted them delivered. Wes pried one crate open with his knife. Inside lay 6 Springfield rifles, packed in oilcloth. Beneath them, cartridges and powder. Enough to start a war, or end one. They stared in silence. Suddenly, a twig snapped. Both turned sharply. From the ridge above, a rifle glinted. And then a voice. Step away from the wagon, Miss Carter. Keever's voice called down, low and smooth. Wes raised his revolver, but Keever chuckled. I wouldn't. There's 5 rifles pointed your way. One twitch, and you'll be bleeding in the mud. Eloise stepped in front of Wes, without hesitation. You said I had till sundown. Keever's silhouette shifted. I lied. Eloise didn't blink. The heat of Keever's betrayal stung more than the sun rising above the ridge. Her eyes scanned the tree line. Movement flickered, shadows too steady to be natural. At least 4 rifles. Possibly more. They were boxed in. Wes lowered his revolver, slow and measured. Not surrender. Calculation. Looks like your deal with Caleb wasn't going so smooth, he called up. Man dies before delivery. You ride in with threats instead of lawyers. Makes me think this cargo ain't exactly legal. Keever chuckled from the shadows. Since when did you care about leap? Don't, Wes said. But I do care about survival. And this don't smell like a fight you can walk away from. Eloise stepped forward, shotgun at her side but unraised. You kill us, Keever, and you'll never find what Caleb really took. Silence. A crow called from the distance. The wind stirred the canvas on the wagon. Keever shifted again. You lying to buy time? He asked. She didn't answer. That was the answer. Wes caught on quickly. He stepped in. We only found half the crates, Keever. You fire now, and the other half burn before your boys make it to the bottom of the ridge. Keever cursed under his breath. He wasn't a patient man, never had been. But he also wasn't stupid. Fine, he growled. Talk. Eloise took a slow breath. We'll bring you the rest. 2 days. You ride out of here, leave us breathing. We give you the goods, no more blood. You think I'm fool enough to believe that? No, Wes said, but you're smart enough to weigh options. You fire now, you might kill us. But you won't find the second stash, or stop the word we'll send west that a man named Keever tried to sell Confederate rifles to whoever paid best. Another silence, this one longer. Then came a laugh, deep and bitter. You got gall, both of you. Carter blood always did run hot. He whistled once. A sharp signal. From the trees, his men emerged, rifles half-raised, cautious. Not committed. I'll give you 1 day, Keever said. Not 2. You don't show with the rest. I torch this whole valley till even the bones scream. With that, he turned and disappeared into the trees. His men followed, not quick but not slow, like wolves retreating with one eye still on the prey. Eloise exhaled shakily. There is no second stash. Wes holstered his Colt. I figured. She turned to him. So what do we do now? He crouched by the wagon. We make this whole damn load disappear before sundown. Her brow furrowed. You want to hide it again? No, Wes said, tugging free a bundle of rifles. I want to move it. All of it. Somewhere he wouldn't think to look. Where? He paused, then glanced at her. You said Caleb always feared the mines. Eloise's eyes widened. The abandoned shaft in Devil's Hollow. Wes nodded. It's deep, cold, forgotten. If we get the crates there by nightfall, we buy ourselves time. And after that, we decide if we give Keever his weapons or bury them forever. Eloise looked at the ridge where Keever's men had vanished, then back at the wagon full of death. You ever get tired of running toward danger? She asked. Wes gave a half smile. Only when it starts running back. They got to work, fast, quiet, and with no certainty of seeing another dawn. By late afternoon, the sun hovered low, throwing long spears of golden shadow across the western plain. The wagon, now stripped of its canvas and partially empty, creaked under the strain of the rocky trail toward Devil's Hollow. Eloise held the reins tight, sweat beading at her brow despite the cooling wind. Wes rode ahead, eyes scanning the ridgelines like a man expecting ghosts in the brush. The trail twisted sharply past the dead cottonwood tree, the one locals claimed whispered at night when the wind blew just right. Beyond it, the terrain dropped sharply. Devil's Hollow opened below them like a wound in the earth, jagged limestone edges, skeletal trees, and a black mouth of a mine shaft swallowed by shadow. You sure about this? Eloise asked as she pulled the wagon to stop at the edge. Nope, Wes answered, but it's all we've got. They worked fast. One by one, they hauled the crates from the wagon and down into the mine. Each box echoed against the walls as it landed, the sound swallowed by the darkness. Inside, the air was thick and stale, the ground slick with moisture. Their boots crunched over decades of abandoned grit, and every breath felt borrowed. Eloise lit a lantern and held it high. The walls glistened faintly with quartz veins, long since picked clean. The mine shaft stretched deeper than the eye could follow, a tunnel into the forgotten past. It smelled of rust and regret. We stashed them behind that old cave-in, Wes said, pointing to a collapsed support wall. No one with half a mind will dig through it. Perfect, Eloise muttered. We just have to pray Keever's not the other half. By the time they finished, the last of the rifles tucked beneath a makeshift rockfall, the sun had begun to bleed out over the ridges. They stood at the mouth of the mine, breathing hard, skin streaked with dirt and sweat. Wes wiped his hands on his coat. If Keever comes back early, he won't, Eloise said. He's too arrogant. He'll give us the full day just to make a point. Wes looked at her. What happens tomorrow? She didn't answer right away. The wind had picked up again, whispering down through the hollow like a sigh. Tomorrow, she finally said, we show him we don't run. Not anymore. Wes nodded, but he didn't smile. He'd seen men die on less conviction. They returned to the homestead under cover of night. The wagon now empty. The trail behind them wiped clean with branches and prayer. Inside the cabin, Eloise bolted the door and sat near the hearth, her fingers idly cleaning the shotgun in her lap. You ever kill a man, Alton? Wes leaned against the wall, silent for a moment. Yeah, he said. Too many. Any of them deserve it. Some, he replied. Others were just in the way. Eloise stared at the flames. Keever's not going to back down. I know. And if it comes to blood, we make it cost him. Thunder rolled faintly in the distance. A storm forming somewhere beyond the hills. Not rain, something else. Eloise stood, walked to the window, and looked out toward the darkness. We bury them all if we have to, she said. Wes stepped up beside her. Then let's be ready. Outside, the prairie lay silent and cold. But in the wind, something stirred. The hush before the hammer drops, the quiet just before the killing starts. Morning came with no birdsong. just a pale light creeping across the floorboards like a hesitant hand. Eloise was already up, sitting on the front porch with her boots unlaced, her coffee gone cold beside her. Her shotgun leaned against the rail within easy reach. Wes emerged from the barn, where he'd spent half the night reinforcing the doors and setting wire traps. He looked like a man who hadn't slept and hadn't expected to. "No sign of riders," he said. "They'll come," Eloise replied, not looking at him. "Keever doesn't bluff twice." Wes crouched, checked the rounds in his Colt, then looked up at her. "We've still got time to run." Eloise gave him a sideways glance. "You can. No shame in surviving. I'm not leaving." That ended that. They spent the morning preparing. Boards nailed over weak window frames. Buckets of water filled and placed at the ready. Ammunition sorted into tins on the table, like preserves from a different kind of harvest. Wes set a Winchester in the rafters. Eloise loaded the Spencer and placed it across the rocking chair. Every sound felt louder. Every creak, every gust. Even the ticking of the old wall clock sounded like a drumbeat marching closer. At midday, they ate in silence. Salt pork, bread, a few pickled green beans from a jar her mother had sealed before her hands went too stiff to hold a knife. Everything felt like a memory waiting to fade. Eloise finally spoke. "I grew up here. This cabin, this land, it's more graveyard than home now." Wes didn't speak. She wasn't finished. "My father was shot trying to stop a cattle thief. My mother died, coughing blood the winter the snow never stopped. Caleb drank himself numb after his second child was stillborn. And Jacob," her voice wavered, then hardened. "Jacob died with a knife in his gut 2 days before he was to be married." Wes stared at the fire. "You've lost more than most." "I've carried more too," she said. "And I won't let Keever plant one more body in Carter soil." That was when the bell rang. Not the dinner bell. The one her father had hung on the post for emergencies. It hadn't sounded in over a decade. She and Wes moved at the same time. Out the window, just past the Treeline riders. 10 at least. Approaching slow, deliberate, not in a rush. The kind of slow that said, "We own the ground." Keever was at the front, reins loose in one hand, a lit cigar in the other. His horse looked exhausted, but he didn't. He looked calm, pleased. Behind him, 2 wagons rumbled forward empty, meant for the rifles. "They think we're going to hand it over," Eloise said. "They think wrong," Wes muttered. She picked up the Spencer. Time to write a different ending. They stepped out onto the porch, side by side. The sky above them was bruised with thick clouds, as if nature itself held its breath. Keever raised a hand, signaling a stop. "Miss Carter," he called. "You've had your day." "Where's my freight?" Eloise stepped forward. "Gone." Keever squinted. "Say again." "I burned it." A ripple passed through the men behind him. Murmurs. Movement. Keever's smile cracked. "Now that's a bold-faced lie." Wes stepped up. "It's ash in Devil's Hollow now. You won't sell a single bullet of it." Keever's jaw tensed. "That was a mistake." "No," Eloise said, voice steady. "Letting Caleb make a deal with you was the mistake. I just corrected it." He lowered the cigar, flicked it to the dirt. "All right then." His hand twitched. Eloise shouted, "Now!" And everything exploded. Wes fired from the rafters, hitting the man nearest Keever's right. The rifle trap by the barn door snapped, dropping another. Eloise's shotgun roared, sending the lead rider off his horse. Keever dove behind his saddle, barking orders. His men scattered, some firing wild, others trying to flank. The Carter homestead became a battlefield, and the wind carried the sound of vengeance across the plains. The air tore apart with gunfire. Rifle cracks and shotgun blasts echoed off the hills, rattling windows and shaking dust from the ceiling beams. Smoke curled into the rafters like the breath of the land itself. Inside the cabin, Wes moved like he had done this before, because he had. His revolver barked once, twice, and a man crumpled in the yard, hands still twitching on his rifle. Eloise was already reloading the Spencer, teeth clenched, face streaked with grit. Her breath came hard and fast, but her aim was true. Another rider dropped in grass, spinning off his saddle in a spray of red. Outside, Keever was yelling, "Circle wide, flank the house." Wes swore under his breath. "They're trying to box us in." "Let them try," Eloise snapped, slamming the bolt home on the rifle. The cabin shook as 2 riders thundered around back. Wes spun, bolted to the kitchen window, and fired through the slats. One fell with a scream. The second dismounted and ran for cover. "He's in the trees," Wes called. Eloise grabbed the oil lamp from the shelf, lit the wick, and hurled it through the open back door. It shattered at the Treeline. The dry underbrush caught instantly. Flames licked upward. Smoke thickened. The wind twisted, fanning the fire east toward the riders. From the front porch, they heard Keever roar in fury. She lit the hollow. "Pull back." Eloise laughed once, bitter and sharp. You wanted fire, Roy. Now burn with it. Wes wasn't laughing. They won't run forever. He'll come back angrier. I'm counting on it, she muttered. Suddenly, a crash. The front door exploded inward. A tall rider, coated in trail dust and rage, stormed through the threshold with a repeating rifle. Eloise turned, but too late. The man struck her across the jaw with the butt of the weapon. She dropped hard, Spencer clattering beside her. Wes fired. Once. Twice. Missed. The rider turned on him, but Wes lunged, driving a shoulder into the man's chest. They crashed into the table, shattering it. The rifle dropped. They grappled on the floor, fists flying, boots scrambling for leverage. The man had a knife. Wes saw the glint. Elbowed him hard in the throat. The man choked. Wes rolled over, grabbed a revolver from the floor, and fired point-blank. Silence followed. A single heartbeat. Wes panted, blood in his mouth, pain blooming behind his ribs. He crawled to Eloise, who was groaning now, trying to sit up. You good? He asked. She nodded slowly. He got lucky. Outside, gunfire had ceased. The smoke was winning now, cloaking the field. The flames danced in the distance, crackling louder than any scream. The riders were retreating, silhouettes vanishing into the gray-orange haze like ghosts caught between two worlds. Wes leaned against the doorframe watching. Keever sat atop his horse at the far ridge, face obscured by the smoke. Even through the heat shimmer, Wes could feel the promise in the man's posture. This isn't over. The outlaw turned and rode off, his men limping behind. Eloise limped to his side. We held, for now. Her lip was bleeding. His knuckles were torn open. The cabin stank of powder and scorched wood. We can't stay here, he said. Next time, they'll bring 20. I know. She looked back at the wrecked homestead, shattered door, broken table, smoke curling from the edge of the roof. And still, she stood tall. We leave at dawn, she said. Wes nodded. Where to? Eloise didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, to find the men who sold Caleb those guns in the first place. This story doesn't end with Keith. By dawn, the cabin stood quiet. Not peaceful, just empty. A shell scorched by smoke and memories. Eloise stood out front, saddlebag over her shoulder, staring at the charred window frame where her mother once hung wildflowers. The blossoms were long gone. Everything was. Wes tightened the cinch on his bay gelding, silent, methodical. He didn't look at her until she spoke. You sure you want to ride with me? She asked. Wes didn't hesitate. You've got a list. So do I. They mounted up without ceremony. No goodbyes. There was no one left to say them to. Just the open road, wide and uncertain. They turned west, riding toward the edge of the hills, toward the last name Caleb had written in the corner of that map before he died. Cassidy Varnell, a man said to deal in weapons, whiskey, and war. As they rode, Eloise recited what she knew. Varnell's based out of a place called Flint Cross. Mining town turned outlaw haven. No marshal, no laws, just pockets deep enough to buy silence. Sounds like my kind of vacation, Wes muttered. Keever wasn't acting alone, she said. If Varnell sold him those rifles, he's part of this. Maybe the start of it. Wes nodded. Then let's ask him kindly. 3 days passed on the trail. Each night they camped far from roads, cooking over low fires, sleeping with weapons within reach. Wes spoke little, but watched the stars like he was reading something in them. Eloise noticed how he flinched in his sleep, how he always checked the back of the camp first, how he never took off his boots unless she did. They trusted each other, but they didn't talk about trust. On the fourth evening, they reached a high ridge. Below them, Flint Cross sprawled across the valley floor like a wound stitched with flickering lamplight and rust-colored roofs. Smoke rose from chimneys, but so did tension. Even from here, they could hear the hammering of iron, the bellow of arguments, the sound of horses being pushed too hard. You ever been here before? Eloise asked. Wes spat to the side. Once. Left with a broken rib and a borrowed horse. Friends? Not exactly. They rode in at dusk, heads low, coats dusted from the trail. No one paid them much mind. Travelers were common, and so were guns. Flint Cross was the kind of place where no one looked twice unless you bled on their floor. They tied the horses outside a saloon called the Red Echo, its windows fogged, its porch sagging. From inside came the faint plinking of piano keys and the laughter of men who'd forgotten what it cost to laugh like that. Varnell drinks here, Wes said. Or used to. Word was he ran cards out the back. Eloise stepped through the swinging doors like she belonged. Inside, the smell of tobacco, sweat, and cheap whiskey wrapped around them like a wet coat. Eyes tracked them, two strangers dusted in trail and purpose. Wes ordered 2 drinks. Eloise leaned against the bar and scanned the room. She spotted him before Wes did. Cassidy Varnell was older than expected, lean and tall with sharp cheekbones and a gray mustache that curled like a villain's. He sat at a corner table, flanked by two men with dull eyes and polished pistols. Wes leaned in close. "You sure?" Eloise didn't blink. "Same face on Caleb's drawing. That's him." They approached slowly. Varnell didn't rise, didn't even flinch. He sipped his whiskey and studied them like a man studying weather patterns, bored but cautious. "Evening," he drawled. Eloise didn't bother with pleasantries. "You sold rifles to Roy Key." Varnell smiled. "Now that's a bold accusation in a public place." Wes set the drink down gently. "We're not here to accuse. We're here to unmake a problem. And what problem is that?" Eloise stared him down. "My brother died because of you. Keever tried to burn my home for a shipment Caleb never delivered. I want names. I want routes. And I want them now." Varnell chuckled. "You think I keep ledgers?" "No," Wes said. "But I think you like your legs not being broken." The two guards reached for their pistols. Too slow. Eloise's shotgun was already pressed under the table. Wes had one revolver drawn, the other cocked in his coat. Varnell's face hardened. "You don't walk away from this town if I say so." Wes leaned in. "Then say it." The silence that followed was sharp. Finally, Varnell nodded once. "You'll want a man named Bishop, out of Calico Ridge. He runs the routes now. Took over when the army stopped looking. Keever answers to him." Eloise narrowed her eyes. "Why tell us?" "Because if you're mad enough to come looking for me, you're mad enough to survive him. And I never liked Bishop anyway." Wes smiled coldly. "That's the smartest thing you've said all night." They backed out of the saloon slowly, weapons still half raised. No one followed. On the street, under a sky full of stars and regret, Eloise whispered, "One step closer." Wes answered, "And one step deeper." The road to Calico Ridge wasn't marked on any maps. It wound through badlands scorched by sun and silence, where even the crows didn't call unless they smelled blood. Wes and Eloise rode light, traveling by moonlight and resting only in the dead heat of midday. Flint Cross had been a warning. Calico Ridge would be a reckoning. They reached it on the fifth evening. Calico Ridge wasn't a town, it was a nest. Built into the rock face like it was afraid of the sky, with wooden shanties clinging to the cliff like stubborn scars. Smoke drifted from chimneys, and the sharp metallic clang of hammers echoed from deep within a mining tunnel that hadn't seen gold in years, just smuggled goods and buried secrets. "This place stinks of secrets," Eloise muttered, squinting against the dying light. Wes nodded. "And blood." They didn't ride in through the main pass. Instead, they tied their horses at a half-dead cottonwood tree and approached on foot through the dry riverbed that twisted beneath the ridge's northern bluff. Wes had scouted this place before, years back, when Bishop was just a name whispered between bounty posters. Now he was something else. A warlord with silver teeth and steel under his skin. They crept up to a ridge overlook just above the town's storage yard. Lanterns flickered below. Men loaded crates onto mules. Eloise pulled out Caleb's map again, checking the markings. "There," she whispered. "The symbol matches the seal on those crates." Wes squinted. Same stamp as Keever's shipment. Then, from one of the shacks, a man emerged. Tall, broad, coat stitched with eagle feathers along the shoulders. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face, but when he looked toward the crates, the lantern caught the glint of silver in his mouth. "Bishop," Wes muttered. Eloise felt her stomach tighten. "He doesn't look like a man who forgets debts." "He doesn't," Wes said. "He buries them." They retreated quietly, slipping back down the slope toward the riverbed. Once hidden beneath the rocks, they lit a small fire and brewed coffee in silence. The plan had to change. "He runs weapons," Eloise said, voice low. "But to who? And why?" "Anyone with coin," Wes replied. "But I've heard rumors. Bishop's not just selling to outlaws. He's arming factions. Men who want the territories to split, who want a new war." Eloise stared into the fire. "He's not a thief. He's a spark. And we're standing in dry grass." They didn't sleep much. At dawn, they returned to the edge of town. This time, they went in openly. Two riders. Dust-covered, unassuming, but eyes sharp as glass. They found Bishop in the saloon, just like Varnell said. He sat at the center table, surrounded by men who didn't smile, didn't drink, didn't blink unless ordered to. His silver teeth flashed when he laughed, but the sound never reached his eyes. They stepped in, unarmed by appearance, but dangerous by posture. Bishop looked up. "Well now, this is unexpected." Eloise didn't hesitate. "I'm here about Roy Keever." His face didn't change. "Dead?" "No, not yet, but you might be." Wes leaned forward. "We know you supplied him. Confederate arms. Smuggled across state lines. And Eloise laid the silver coin, Caleb's coin, on the table. This cost my brother his life. Bishop stared at it. The saloon went still. Then slowly, he pushed back his chair and stood. Let me show you something. Wes tensed, but Eloise nodded. They followed. Bishop led them out the back and down into a shaft lit with lanterns and lined with crates. Dozens of them, more than they'd imagine. Rifles, pistols, crates of ammunition stamped with military seals. Keever was a flea on a dog, Bishop said. You want justice. You're chasing shadows. This is bigger than him, than me. Eloise stared at the stockpile. Who are you arming? Anyone with enough hate in their bones to load a bullet, he replied. Territory militias. Border gangs. Men who think war makes better maps. Wes said, you're playing God with fire. No, Bishop said. I'm just selling the matchsticks. He turned to leave. That was when the shot rang out. A single crack. Bishop dropped, a bullet through his back, silver teeth stained red. From the ridge above, a rider stood with a rifle still smoking. Roy Keever. Bishop hit the dirt hard, dust kicking up around his twitching frame. Blood soaked into the grit beneath him, pooling fast. His eyes rolled once, unfocused, then froze open. Dead. Eloise ducked instinctively, hand reaching for a weapon she hadn't drawn. Wes was already turning, revolver in hand, scanning the ridge behind the warehouse. Keever, he growled. The outlaw stood tall on a black stallion, rifle resting across the saddle horn. Smoke still curled from the muzzle. A dozen riders flanked him, faces familiar from the siege at Carter's homestead. Their silhouettes were rimmed in gold from the setting sun, casting long, distorted shadows down the slope. Figured I'd save you the trouble, Keever called, grinning. Bishop wasn't much for conversation anyway. Eloise stepped out, unarmed but not unafraid. You followed us. Of course I did, he said. You made it too easy. Flint Cross has more leaks than a mining tunnel. Wes raised his pistol halfway. So what now? You come to finish the job. Keever chuckled. No. I came to take what's mine. Bishop owed me more than rifles. He owed me a kingdom. He kicked his horse forward, descending slowly, not hiding, not hurrying. See, you two stirred the pot. Varnell's running scared, Bishop's bleeding out, and now every arm in this territory's up for grabs. All I gotta do is step in. Eloise's voice was cold. We're not letting you take these weapons. Keever reined in, 10 paces away. You think you can stop me? With what? Guilt. Wes stepped forward. With lead. Another chuckle. That's what I like about you, Alton. Always straight to the point. He nodded once, and his riders began to spread, forming a crescent around the storage yard. Eloise whispered, We're boxed in. Wes didn't move. Good. I was getting tired of chasing. And then everything erupted. Wes fired first, one shot, clean, dropped the nearest rider. Eloise grabbed a Winchester from a crate behind her and racked it in one motion. She fired toward the edge of the line, scattering 2 horses. Keever cursed and dove behind a crate, barking orders. The sound of gunfire swallowed the air. Sparks flew from stone and iron. Lanterns shattered, casting chaotic shadows over the yard. Eloise moved between cover, reloading with a calm born of fury. Wes fought like a man who had nothing left to lose, precise, ruthless, silent. But the numbers were against them. More riders poured in from the ridge. Keever had come prepared. Wes ducked behind a crate and called, We gotta blow the stockpile. Eloise glanced at the dynamite crate, labeled in red, half buried near the tunnel entrance. You get there, she yelled. I'll cover. Wes sprinted. Gunfire lit the yard like a storm. Eloise stepped out into the open, firing with deadly rhythm, giving Wes the seconds he needed. A shot grazed her arm. Pain flashed hot, but she didn't falter. Wes reached the crate, tore it open, and yanked the fuse cord from his belt pouch. He shoved sticks of dynamite into the powder crates, hands moving fast. 30 seconds, he shouted. Eloise dropped behind cover, reloading one last time. We're not dying here. No, Wes growled. But they are. They ran, back through the yard, over the rail, past the blood and fire. Behind them, Keever rose from cover, eyes wide as he saw the fuse hissing toward the heart of his ambition. No. The blast tore through Calico Ridge like a wrathful god. Fire rolled upward into the sky, turning dusk into daylight. Crates exploded like thunder, rifles melted into twisted iron, bodies hurled backward like ragdolls caught in a tornado. The cliffside buckled, part of the mine collapsing inward with a groaning shriek. Wes and Eloise hit the dirt behind a ridge boulder, shielded just enough to survive. The shockwave passed. Then, silence. Not the silence of peace. The silence of aftermath. Smoke choked the air. Flames danced along splintered walls. Ash drifted like snow. Eloise rose slowly, clutching her arm, staring at what remained. It's gone. All of it, Wes said. She turned to him. "Did you see Keever?" He shook his head. "Not after the blast." They searched the wreckage briefly, cautiously. Bodies lay twisted and half-buried, many unrecognizable. But no sign of Roy Keever. No silver coins. No horse. No trace. Eloise's voice was cold. "If he lived, he'll come back." Wes stared at the horizon, sky turning black with soot and stars. "Then we'll be ready." The fire at Calico Ridge burned for 2 days. By the time it died, the town had turned to scorched stone and silence. No lawmen came, no bounty riders, just buzzards circling overhead, curious and patient. Wes and Eloise didn't stay to count the dead. They knew what they'd done, and who might still be breathing. They rode west again, toward cooler air and lower ground. Eloise's arm was wrapped tight, the bullet graze no longer bleeding, but still angry. Wes had a cracked rib, judging by how he winced when mounting up, but neither complained. They didn't talk much for the first half-day, not until the smoke was behind them. It was Eloise who finally broke the silence. "Keever didn't die in that blast." Wes nodded. "I know. He'll come for us." "I know." She looked ahead. The landscape was changing, greener now, more trees. Less dust, less death, but peace was still far off. "What do we do when he does?" she asked. Wes didn't answer immediately. Then he said, "We finish what we started. One way or the other." They stopped that evening at a watering hole known by traders as Widow's Basin, a small spring surrounded by rock walls and overgrown brush. A natural hideaway. While Eloise washed the dried blood from her sleeve, Wes scouted the perimeter. He came back with tracks. Fresh ones. "Horse," he said. "Unshod. Moving slow. Not more than a day ahead." Eloise frowned. "One rider. Looks like it. But careful. Could be bait. Or it could be him." They camped light, ate jerky and cold beans, took shifts watching the dark. That night, Wes didn't sleep. He sat by the coals, revolver across his lap, staring into the shadows beyond the firelight. When morning broke, they followed the tracks. The trail wound north through scrub hills and tangled brush, over creeks and under low canopies of black oak. They rode quiet, like ghosts chasing ghosts. By afternoon, the trail led into a dry ravine, the kind perfect for ambushes. Wes dismounted, checking the dust. Still alone, still fresh. Eloise dropped beside him. "You sure it's not just some poor drifter?" Wes looked at the faint imprint in the mud. A boot print, narrow, high-heeled. "Not a drifter," he said. "A showman." She followed his gaze. "Keever." They pressed on, rifles at the ready. And just before dusk, they found the camp. A small fire, a bedroll, a lean-to made of canvas and stripped pine branches. But no horse, no gear, and no key. Wes signaled a halt, raised 2 fingers. They circled wide, weapons drawn. Then they heard it, the click of a hammer behind them. "Well," said a familiar voice. "You took your damn time." Keever stepped from the rocks, battered but alive. Dust clung to his coat. One arm hung limp, likely broken. His face was bruised, one eye swollen shut, but his smile was intact, cruel and wide. "I figured if you were going to kill me," he said, "you'd at least want to look me in the eyes." Eloise raised her rifle. "Why didn't you run?" He didn't flinch. "Because I'm tired of running. You burned everything I built. My people are dead. My suppliers gone. But you too, you're still standing. That counts for something." Wes narrowed his eyes. "You expecting mercy?" Keever chuckled. "Hell no. I expect a bullet." He stepped forward, hands out, unarmed. "But I'll make you a deal." Eloise's voice was ice. "After all you've done, you think you get to make deals?" "Not for me," Keever said. "For someone else." He reached slowly into his coat and pulled out a photograph, folded, dirty. He tossed it at Eloise's feet. A child, 6, maybe 7, brown eyes, a small silver locket around her neck. "My daughter," he said, "lives in Dust Creek. Her mother's gone. She thinks I'm a merchant." "You're a murderer," Wes said. "I know," Keever said softly, "but she doesn't, and I'd like it to stay that way." Eloise stared at the picture. "Why show us this?" "Because you're going to kill me," he said, "but I want you to lie to her. Just once." Wes looked at Eloise. She said nothing for a long moment. Then turn around. Keever's smile faltered. "You could shoot me face to face, at least." "I don't owe you anything," she said. He turned. The silence stretched. Then the single crack of a rifle. Keever fell forward, still smiling. Wes looked at Eloise. Her hands didn't shake. She stared at the body for a long time, then picked up the photograph. "I'll write her a letter," she said. The road into Dust Creek was narrow and worn, edged with wind-beaten fences and fields gone fallow. It wasn't a place for troublemakers or memory. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that lets wounds hide instead of heal. Eloise and Wes rode slow, letting their horses ease into town without drawing eyes. The streets were mostly empty. One old man rocked on a porch. A few children chased a hoop down the dirt lane. Laundry flapped on clotheslines between low, leaning homes. They stopped in front of a whitewashed chapel with a tin roof and a crooked steeple. Eloise pulled the reins in, staring at the building for a long moment. "She's here," Wes asked. "She has to be," Eloise said. "Keever's letter said the preacher's wife took the girl in after her mother died." Wes looked around. Town doesn't seem to know what sort of monster they sheltered. Eloise dismounted, tucked the photograph into her coat, and walked toward the chapel steps. Inside, the chapel smelled of old cedar and beeswax. The pews were worn smooth by time and sorrow. At the front, a soft voice hummed, not a hymn, but something gentler. A woman appeared from behind the pulpit, wiping her hands on an apron. She was in her 60s, hair tied back, eyes kind but cautious. "Can I help you?" she asked. Eloise nodded. "I'm looking for a girl, Clara. Her father was a merchant." The woman's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes shifted. "Clara's out back, feeding the chickens. May I speak with her?" "She doesn't know what her father really was," the woman said gently. "He wrote her letters, sent money, promised to come home one day. She still waits." Eloise nodded. "I know. She thinks he died in a fire hauling supplies." Eloise swallowed. "That's not far from the truth." The woman studied her. "Are you the one who sent the letter?" "I am." The woman held her gaze, then finally nodded and stepped aside. "Don't break her, miss. She's just a child." Eloise stepped through the back door. Clara sat on a stump, scattering corn for a handful of skinny hens. She wore a faded yellow dress and boots too big for her. Her dark hair was tied with a blue ribbon. She looked up with curious eyes but didn't smile. "Hello," Eloise said softly. "Are you from the train?" the girl asked. "No, not today. I knew your father." Clara brightened a little. "You did? Did he send you?" Eloise knelt beside her. "Not exactly, but he wanted me to see you." Clara tilted her head. "Did he tell you about the big river he was going to take me to one day?" "Yes," Eloise whispered. "He told me everything." The girl went back to tossing corn, distracted by a hen that pecked too close to her shoes. "He's still coming, right?" Eloise fought the ache in her throat. "No, sweetheart, he's not." Clara's hands froze. "But he loved you," Eloise added quickly, "and he wanted you safe. That's why you're here." The girl didn't cry. She just stared at the ground for a long time. Then, "He always said the world was dangerous." "It is," Eloise said, "but it's also full of people who keep going. People who fight for good. People like you." Clara looked up. "Are you one of them?" Eloise hesitated, then nodded. "I'm trying to be." Wes watched from the trees at the edge of the yard. He saw the way Clara stood tall even as her heart cracked. She reminded him of someone. Maybe Eloise. Maybe himself. That night, they left a small pouch of silver coins with the preacher's wife. Enough to last the girl a year. Enough to start again. As they mounted up under the stars, Wes asked, "You sure she'll be all right?" Eloise nodded. "She's stronger than he ever was." They rode out of Dust Creek with no goodbyes. The girl watched from the window, holding the blue ribbon in her fingers, eyes dry but full. Eloise didn't look back. 2 weeks later, Wes and Eloise rode into Elkhorn Bend, a junction town where 3 rail lines met, and the mail came twice a week if the winds were kind. It wasn't much to look at: cracked roads, crooked signs, and one saloon that doubled as a post office, jail, and dentist on alternating days. But they weren't here for beauty. They were chasing paper, specifically letters. Eloise leaned across the counter of the dusty deep, watching the old clerk sort envelopes with thick fingers and thick glasses. "Name was Roy Keever," she said. "Might have used aliases. We're looking for anything he sent to Dust Creek in the last 6 months." The clerk blinked slowly. "You got a badge to back that request." Wes laid $5 silver on the counter. The clerk suddenly remembered he'd never liked Keever much. "You said Dust Creek? Hold on." He disappeared into the back. Eloise looked around. A wall map of the Western Territories hung crooked on the wall, edges curling inward. Dozens of pins stuck in it, some places long dead, others forgotten. "Think we'll find something?" she asked. Wes leaned against the wall. Keever wasn't just running guns. He was organizing, coordinating. That takes words. Letters. The clerk returned with a bundle wrapped in string. "Here. All addressed from R. Kingsley. Return address listed as Fort Ballin. Sound familiar?" Eloise frowned. Fort Ballin was abandoned after the war. "Not anymore," Wes muttered, flipping through the letters. Each envelope was sealed, but the handwriting matched. Inside they found code, phrases about shipments and provisions, about second-hands and weather windows. Nothing overt, but the meaning was clear. Smuggling instructions. Supply drops. Coordination between men like Bishop, Keever, and others. One letter stood out. It was newer, dated just weeks before Calico Ridge burned. It read, "If the mountain turns, follow the river. The third branch holds the iron. Speak to Whitlock. He still remembers Varnell's promise." Whitlock, Eloise said aloud. Another name. Wes nodded. Could be the last one. They took the letters and burned the ones they didn't need. Left the silver behind for the clerk, who suddenly found something to sweep that wasn't there before. Outside, the wind carried a scent of autumn, dry leaves with smoke and the sharp tang of something about to end. Eloise unfolded a map across the saddle. There's a third fork near Boulder Creek. That's got to be what the letter meant. And Whitlock. We find him, we end this trail. For good. Wes watched her for a moment, then said, "You've changed." She looked up. "So have you." They camped that night by the river bend. The stars reflected off the water like broken glass. Neither of them slept. Instead, they sat side by side, weapons within reach, memories closer. "You ever think about going back?" Eloise asked. Wes shrugged. "Back to what?" "Home. Whatever that is." He didn't answer. She smiled faintly. "Didn't think so." As the fire crackled low, a coyote howled in the distance. The sound was lonely, not dangerous, just alone. Eloise pulled her coat tighter. "Tomorrow we find Whitlock, and then I bury this trail." Wes nodded slowly. "Or it buries us." They followed the river fork north, past rusted fences and hollowed-out cabins that whispered of a past no one dared remember. 3 branches split the land here, and the third ran narrow through a steep-walled canyon known only to locals as the Scar. At the canyon's mouth, they found what they were looking for: a cabin, freshly built, smoke curling from the chimney, and a man sitting on the porch with a long rifle across his knees. "Whitlock," Wes muttered. The man stood as they approached, squinting against the sun. He was wiry, mid-50s, eyes sharp and coiled like wire, beard streaked with gray and dirt. "Depends who's asking," he said. Eloise didn't stop riding until she was 10 paces away. Then she dismounted and tossed something toward him, the envelope with Varnell's seal. Whitlock caught it midair, opened it, read a single line, then looked up, something in his eyes hardening. "You're late," he said. "You were expecting us?" Wes asked. "No, but I was expecting trouble. Same thing lately." Eloise stepped forward. "We know about the weapons. The network. Keever's dead. Bishop too. Varnell's vanished. You're the last not left to untie." Whitlock didn't flinch. "You think killing me ends anything?" "No," Eloise said, "but it ends your part." Whitlock looked between them, weighing options. Then he did something unexpected. He stepped aside. "In the cellar," he said. "Map, names, ledgers, everything." Wes blinked. "Just like that." "I was loyal to an idea," Whitlock said. "Not to madmen who trade rifles for blood. I buried enough children in my time." They entered the cabin. The cellar was dry and lined with crates, old army records, and scribbled maps tracing weapon routes from Mexico to the Rockies. Wes opened one ledger and whistled. "This is a war waiting to happen." Eloise pulled a match from her coat. "You sure?" Wes asked. She struck it. "They can't kill each other if they're not armed." She dropped it. The fire caught instantly. Wood crackled. Ink curled into smoke. Pages turned to ash. They walked out as the flames rose behind them. Whitlock stood in the yard, watching everything burn. He didn't run, didn't beg. "I'll stay put," he said. "You want to tell the law I won't fight." Wes nodded once. "They'll come for you eventually." "I know." As they rode away, Eloise glanced back just once. The smoke was black and high, but her heart felt clearer than it had in years. 3 months later, the name Carter was whispered less often in fear and more often in reverence. The weapons trade in the western valleys collapsed overnight. Militia groups scattered. No one knew who had burned the ledgers, but the right people suspected. Eloise returned briefly to her homestead. The ruins were still there, scorched porch, blackened beams. But the soil had healed, and wildflowers had started to grow where blood once soaked the earth. She stood there one last time, then turned her back to it all. She never looked back again. Epilogue. In a quiet town near the southern border, a child named Clara played beneath the cottonwood trees. A letter came every month, signed by a friend of her father, telling her stories about rivers, distant stars, and how brave people leave the world better than they found it. In one of those letters, she read, "The West is full of ashes, but some ashes bloom. You're one of them. Never forget that." And far away, on the edge of a canyon bathed in sunset, 2 riders crested a ridge, one with a Colt across his chest, the other with a rifle slung low and steady. They didn't speak. They just rode on, together, into whatever came next.